Once a giant, always a uh
Field Barkley slips 2 tackles and picks up the.
Yeah, you know what? That phrase doesn't mean anything right now. We need to bring that phrase back to the Giants, and we need to get this football team turned around. We got to get serious, man. New York Giants fans, G-Man, where you at? We got to talk about this football team. What do they need to do this offseason? We got free agency coming up really just around the corner. I'm hearing some interesting rumors, but we're going to get into a roster breakdown for this team, talk about the strengths and weaknesses, a free agency strategy, and then a 7-round mock draft. Let's start with the offensive line, though. Those hog mollies, the players up in the trenches, need to continue to be improved. I will say this offensive line was one of the best that they had, at least when they were healthy earlier in the season. But it's still got ways to go. They need to improve. They need certain areas. They're going to have to add some much-needed depth right here at this tackle room, especially for injuries. Andrew Thomas, unfortunately, at this point, has been a little banged up through his career. And that is something going forward they're going to have to address. They're going to need to make sure that they've got a really good swing tackle, because when they subbed in Joshua Zudu, he's going to be a guy that needs to go inside the guard, just like Evan Neal, in my opinion. But Zudu was not good, got benched. Chris Hubbard came in, not much better. They have to upgrade this tackle room. They ended up moving Jermaine Illuminor over to left tackle because they had to. There were no other options. And speaking of Jermaine Illuminor, a really good player. And both of these guys, Andrew Thomas and Jermaine Illuminor, are both very, very good starters for this football team. Andrew Thomas can be an elite tackle. He has all the tools to be an elite tackle. Jermaine Illuminor has been a rock-solid player for this team and one of Joe Shane's better signings in free agency. You can make the argument of that. And yeah, I mean, they've got their starters. It just comes down to who's the backup if you have injuries. So that's going to be something I look at. Not to mention Jermaine Illuminor is going to be going into a contract year. So we're going to try to invest in that into the future. I think this is like a 3rd through 4th round sort of need. And then a free agency pickup for some depth. And then Evan Neal, we're going to discuss that because Evan Neal is somebody I think needs to move to the interior bad. Like they got to do it. It's enough's enough. This guy, he can block dudes when it's straight in front of his face. Like, he's got tremendous power, but he cannot block dudes in any sort of space around him. If he tries to make any movements, he's going down. So let's go ahead and transition to the interior of the offensive line. And where I want to include Evan Neal is in this interior of the offensive line as well, because I want him to be competing for a job here. I don't want him to sit on that cap space for $7 million. I don't know any teams that are really going to take a trade at him, especially since he would count towards like $4 million on their cap space. So it's going to be tough to maneuver a trade. Now, a lot of teams could take that opportunity. We'll see how it works out if they wanted to move on from him this offseason. But for me personally, I would move him inside, give him a chance here, see if he can work out. And that way, you never know, right? And that way, if he does hit out, then it's not a complete bust of a pick, and you can go from there and see how the situation unfolds this next season. But you talk about this interior of the offensive line in general. Jon Runyan, signing from the Green Bay Packers. I thought he was good. I thought he had a really nice season when he was out on the football field. And whether he's a right guard for them in the future or left guard, if they want to keep him there, then that's fine. I still think he played a little bit better at right guard. So that's kind of one thing you can note there. Has more familiarity at the right guard position. And with Greg Van Roten being a free agent, I would try to bring him back if you can. And Van Roten was a really solid player, especially even though he's a little bit older. I think he's a guy that shouldn't be super expensive. So keeping him back, at least as a good depth player, would be really, really clutch for this football team. So all in all, my recommendation for the guard position, you got Jon Runyan under contract. A little expensive, of course. I mean, ideally it'd be a little cheaper than that, but they needed him, and he helped out their offensive line. Greg Van Roten, I try to bring him back on a cheap, friendly deal, as long as he wants to continue to play. And then you got Evan Neal competing in one of those roster spots, maybe with Greg Van Roten. And then Jake Cabas, also a guy that I know they're very high on, and maybe he's another dude that could be a sneaky developmental guard for them as well. So I think that they're okay in the guard position as long as you bring back Greg Van Roten. My attention really is actually in John Michael Schmitz. Just unfortunately he just has not been able to hold up, and he gets pushed back way too often, in my opinion. He just doesn't quite have the strength profile, which is very baffling to me. He seems like he'd be a strong dude. It just seems like right now, maybe it's a technique issue. I don't know. But at this point, I'm getting concerned, and they need to add to this room. And I don't know if I see anybody here. Maybe Brian Hudson. I did like him coming out of Louisville. So maybe, but for right now, I don't feel good that they have anybody to be at least good competition for John Michael Schmitz. And that's why I'm going to be looking at either A, picking somebody up in free agency, or B, drafting somebody in the mid-round range, mid to late round range at nothing else to get more help in this room, because they got to add more help in that interior and get some upgrade there, because John Michael Smith, just like I said, hasn't quite gotten there yet. Maybe he can elevate this next season. Certainly going to be a big year for him. But for right now, I'm going to make sure we add some competition at that center position. Has to do that. We have to. And then we go on to the tight end room. Theo Johnson. I like Theo, and I do think he'll end up being a really solid starting tight end for this football team going forward. Right now, there's some rookie mistakes. He got some drops here and there. I expect him to get better, iron out some things, and as a blocker too. But he showed a lot of promise as a blocker and as a receiving weapon. So I'm not this to me is not a huge need. I don't even know if it is a need. You can bring back Chris Manhertz, who's really their best blocker. And if you keep him, then you got Daniel Bellinger, Greg Dulcich. Dulcich has a lot of upside too if he can just stay healthy. So I will say, in general, if you bring back Chris Manhertz as your main blocker, you got Theo Johnson developing, you got Daniel Bellinger still under contract. We'll see if Greg Dulcich stays healthy. Like I said, could be a great number 2 for this football team. In general, I think they're at a good spot. The only recommendation I would have is maybe you draft a blocking tight end. Ultimately, for this scheme, it's not something that is a huge priority for me, is drafting another wide receiving tight end. I think they're in a good spot there. The only thing, like I said, would be a blocking tight end. And then moving on to the wide receivers here, and you got Malik Gomer Neighbors, Steven Pesta. Yo, big shot, man. The dude, he was spot on. Go get Gomer Neighbors. This dude's going to be a true number 1. Boom. Dude has been rocks unbelievable. Malik Neighbors is an absolute star. Gomer Neighbors. And this team's number 1 wide receiver already, right away. He came right in, dominated, had some injuries. He was on pace, though, for astronomical numbers. And if you get better quarterback play, oh my goodness, 2,000 yards incoming. So I'm really excited. At least you got a number 1 wide receiver. Now, you look at this, you got Wan'Dale Robinson, really solid slot target. Maybe the low depth of target is not hey, you'd like to get somebody else if you lose Darius Slayton, as I talked about earlier with the once a giant, always a giant phrase. Hasn't quite been there lately. Darius Slayton's another one of those candidates like Saquon Barkley that could go out in free agency, get a contract, and it's not even all about the money for Slayton. I just think he's going to go to a better situation, and I could see him being a really good wide receiver for a team that needs a good weapon, because he's got all the talent. Darius Slayton is a good outside wide receiver, made a lot of plays for this team throughout his career here. I know the numbers were down, but you got to look at the quarterback play this season too. So it's not all about the numbers. I do like Darius Slayton. And if you can bring him back, if he wants to come back, I hear he's a great locker room guy, somebody that the coaches rave about. And certainly if he wants to come back, I'm bringing him back. That's something that Joe Shane needs to make right here with Darius Slayton. Because they've also had some discrepancies with money in the past with him and trying to take pay cuts and things like that. So that's another reason why I'm a little bit worried about if they're going to be able to retain him or not. So we'll keep an eye out on some of those things, but I really like Slayton. It just comes down to the finances and what he wants to do in his career, and I wish him the best no matter what. In general, though, if we end up losing Slayton, we're going to have to try to add some sort of competition, or at least some more depth as that number 2, number 3 wide receiver. I don't know if Jalen Hyatt's going to be that guy. Maybe Bryce Ford Wheaton at some point steps up if he can get out there and stay healthy. I think Amir Smith-Marset is a priority re-sign as a good return man. He's an excellent return man. So if you can bring him back, I would do that. I mean, maybe not much as a receiver, but as a return man, special teamer, he's one of the better in the business. And Gunnar Olszewski, you kind of make that determination. I think you're going to decide to pay one of those guys. But with the recent injury of Olszewski, then maybe Amir Smith-Marset has kind of stamped himself as the starter going forward. And then on to the running back room. I think they're in a decent spot here. It's not an elite running back room, but I thought that they're in a really good position going forward. Tyron Tracy looked great as a rookie. Got to work on the fumbling. Okay, I thought that was his biggest issue this season. And maybe pass pro too, wasn't always perfect. And as a rookie, I'm cool with that. But anyway, you got Motor Singletary still under contract, and Eric Gray hasn't quite been able to step up. They could draft somebody late. Singletary, this might be his last year. They might get a little cheaper, move on from his contract in 2026. But for right now, Tracy, Singletary, it gets the job done. I thought they actually worked pretty well, as considering the offensive line wasn't always great this season, and the injuries, especially at the end of the season, were really struggling for them too. But Tracy, really good receiving back, and showed some really nice running vision as a ball carrier too. So I'm impressed with Tyron Tracy. Purdue, boiler up. That's what I'm talking about. So not really much of a need here. Let's go on to the quarterback room. Exact opposite situation. This is a huge need, the biggest need on the roster, right? They got to improve, and they got to find some sort of competency at the quarterback position. Joe Shane, Brian Dable, this is the area that I think they're going to have so much urgency to do because their jobs are on the line. I don't know how much longer John Mara is going to be so lenient in this scenario. So they better find a quarterback that could get them to the playoffs and right away, because it's not their jobs are very, very grim. And Drew Lock, yeah, clearly not the starter. Tommy DeVito, Tom Boyle, they gotta go and address this. Free agency, the draft, some sort of combination, get somebody in here. So we'll be doing that here very soon. On to the defense side of the ball, and the defensive line. Let's start off with the edge rushers, and they're in a good position here with Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau. KT and B Burns, let's bring it on, because the only thing they need is a little bit of depth here. And with Azeez Ojulari being a free agent, we'll see if he gets more money elsewhere. I think he'll end up coming back on a cheap, like 1 year prove it sort of deal for this team. However, that's just a little bit unknown. We'll talk more about that in free agency. I do like Ojulari, just kind of the injuries have been the big question for him. KT, definitely still coming along there. A lot of upside with KT. I think they'll give him the 5th-year option, and that's something we'll see what happens in the next coming weeks or so, because they're discussing that right now. But they definitely, I would probably do it. Personally, that's what I would do. Burns, Thibodeau, and you got Toman Fox, who's a nice, solid depth player as well. Patrick Johnson, you can bring him back for special teams. On to the interior of the defensive line. This is also one of the bigger needs on the roster, in my opinion. You got a stud. You got Sexy Dexy out here. Oh yeah, we're gonna be pulling the Sexy Dexy dance all day long. I love it, but you got to get somebody else in here. Like, this room is just been it's been a rotation of a lot of different guys, and I don't want to. I mean, Elijah Chapman stepped up this season. I love Rakim Nunez Roches just as a person. Like, he seems like a real fun dude and everything like that. But with the cap, they may move on from him. I do think that's a possible cut. He's a possible cut candidate, so we'll see. But ultimately, you got Elijah Garcia, DJ Davidson, Armin Watts is a free agent. You got some other guys like Corey Durden that can step up, Jordan Riley, but those are guys that are going to be competing for roster spots. We need to add some much-needed firepower next to Sexy Dexy here. So that, to me, is a huge need. It's a free agency need and a draft need. This is a both category situation. Maybe not number 3 overall pick, but I mean, Mason Graham, I certainly wouldn't hate it. It's just they're going to have to look at upgrading this. They have to improve the depth here. They got to. So if Dexy, needs a little bit of a break, they got to give him some guys around him. And then going on to the linebacking core, it's a really solid linebacking core. Bobby Okereke, Micah McFadden, 2 really good playmakers at this linebacker position. Now, this also stems to helping improve the interior of the defensive line, because I do think Okereke is better in a coverage role and more of a, he's the green dot guy in this linebacking room, and he's good. I mean, he is a good linebacker. I just think that he would be better in a scenario where he doesn't have to take on as many blockers. It's not really his strong suit. He just is more of a coverage guy, but he's got really good chase speed and certainly a good tackler. And Micah McFadden is more of your take-on guy who's just not afraid of anybody, but he's not the biggest guy either, so he's going to have some limitations there. I like Micah McFadden, IU, Hoosiers, let's go. You know how we go with that. But Bobby Okereke, Micah McFadden, solid stars. I don't think you need to upgrade any one of those guys. You got Darius Muasau, who also played a good amount of snaps for them, and I saw him making some really nice plays. He's a little bit limited as an athlete, but he has some good instincts, and I think he can be a good early down run defender as well. It just, they could look at the future here with Micah McFadden being a free agent next season, Bobby Okereke going to be expensive next year, and they could move on from his cap. That is a possibility. So this is an area where maybe we draft somebody to develop behind Bobby Okereke. I think Darius Muasau, if they end up losing Micah McFadden, I don't see why they would. He shouldn't be super expensive, but they can work out in tandem in that role. In terms of some of the depth here, guys that I'd be looking to re-sign, like Ty Summers, I would try to re-sign him. Then you got some, exclusive restricted guys like Deontay Johnson. Matthew Adams is a unrestricted. I don't know if they'll bring him back or not. Isaiah Simmons, I probably wouldn't bring back personally. Just hasn't really been able to get it. If the football, I mean, he's a great athlete and everything like that, but the football play has got to get better. Well, let's go on to the cornerback room now, and it starts with Deonte Banks, former first-round selection. Has not quite, he showed some real good promise in the rookie season. Kind of took a bit of a step back here this year. Got to get better. I think that it was a little bit of a difference for him in Shane Bowen's scheme as well. And that's another thing we talk about is this scheme is more zone heavy. All right. And while Banks could be adjusting, there were times where it didn't seem comfortable at all in coverage. So I'm hoping that there's a next gear, a next step this next season, a little more urgency to his play. And hey, the guy's got all the talent, so I'm not ready to give up on him. But I do want to add into this room Cordell Flott. His biggest thing is struggling in tackling. I think that's what his biggest knock is. He's a solid coverage player. I actually think he made some really nice plays this season. Still a guy, though, that maybe ideally you say would be a great backup number 3 corner to have behind these guys. However, definitely a guy that I still think could start for this football team. Andrew Phillips looked really, really good at the beginning of the season. Did have some injuries. We'll keep an eye on that. But ultimately, he looks like a foundational slot corner that they found in the 3rd round there. So really good pickup by Joe Shane. Then we go on to Trey Hawkins. Solid depth. I think he's a good backup to have. Adoree Jackson, I think, will end up going somewhere else in free agency, which is fine. I mean, they brought him back later on, or the season started. They were kind of all over the place there. But I think he ends up going somewhere else this offseason. They got to get stronger, really, at this cornerback. But which is, I talk about, it's been a bit of a weakness in general for this room, is consistency tackling on the outside. You got Greg Stroman, nice solid backup there. I think they could bring him back on the cheap if they wanted to. I do like the idea of bringing in a free agent corner in here, somebody with some more experience, because since they're so young, I mean, Flott, Banks, Phillips, Hawkins, they're all 25 and under right there. So it's like they got really, really young players. It would be beneficial to bring in a veteran in here. But you also have to look at the draft board and determine what their plans are at the quarterback position. If they say, hey, look, we're going to see how the board falls because Cam Ward may end up going number 1 overall, that leaves you Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter on the board. And with the premium position of edge rusher, I think it's probably more likely that Travis Hunter would be there for their pick at number 3. And hey, I would love that too. I think if you add Travis Hunter in here, he's my number 1 player in the draft class, and that would be really a fantastic option as well. So you have to kind of plan your draft strategy with your free agency strategy. If they pick somebody up at the quarterback in free agency that they feel good about, and then they want to draft somebody maybe on day 2 or day 3, then you could go that route and then draft a cornerback in the 1st round. Certainly a lot of things on the table. Or if you want to go quarterback 1st round, then you go get a free agent cornerback, and I think that would be really good too. And then we go on to the safety position. Tyler Nubin had his lumps and had his moments, but I thought he was really good as a rookie safety. And going forward, I think he'll be a very solid starter for this football team. So I'm not worried about that. I thought that he was a little bit I didn't see much of him in coverage this year, but I thought he was a really good tackler, made a lot of big plays at the line of scrimmage. So some of those coverage things, I think it'll just come in a little bit of time as he gets more comfortable. And then you got Jason Pinnock here as their other starting safety. He definitely took a big step back in my eyes this season. Not saying he's a bad football player. Ideally, he would be like a 3rd safety. And for this Giants team, I don't know. Maybe Shane Bowen looks for a guy that's a little bit more comfortable in the back end, in zone coverage. So that to me is one area that I do think that they can address in free agency as well, is trying to find somebody with some veteran leadership in the back end coverage role wise. You got Dane Belton, solid backup and whatnot. Besides that, though, there's a little bit of unknown there. And that's why I'm saying I think this is a draft possibly need somewhere in the later rounds, and also bring in somebody in free agency that can start right away next to Tyler Nubin. If you end up losing Jason Pinnock, we'll see if they re-sign him or not. It's just going to come down to some financials, I'm sure, and scheme fit too. That may be the bigger area, maybe not even just financially, because I don't think Pinnock would take that much money. But in terms of scheme-wise, I think they may look to find somebody else that fits Shane Bowen a little bit better as a zone defender. And then we go on to the free agency strategy now, and we start off with the team cuts. And I'm going to go ahead and move on from Graham Gano. Certainly not a bad kicker, but I think that they can save quite a bit of money and bring some guys in camp here to compete for that roster spot, for that kicker position. Just $3 million. I got to save that money. So I'm going to do that. And then Raheem Nunez, Roches, we're going to save a little bit of money there too, $3.6 million. I think we can go even cheaper than that and plus find maybe a little bit better of a run defender. Nunez, Roches kind of just struggled a bit in that department holding up. So I want to find a little bit more of an upgrade there, or at least more possibility of an upgrade at that nose, or giving Sexy Dexy a break there possibly at the nose / better run defense. Which leads us into our unrestricted free agent signings here. I'm going to go ahead and start with the offense. We have a little over $56 million to spend. Yes, they can restructure. Joe Shane has already said, hey, look, don't want to restructure too much. Want to make sure we're not going all this money into the future. And I agree with that. I think it's a smart move. So we're going to try to keep that game plan in mind too. And then I could see them maybe restructuring 1 or 2 guys, but I think it's going to be very light with restructuring. Now, offensively wise, Amir Smith-Marset, I'm going to give him that nod as the return man. So I'm going to return him back on a nice little pay raise there. Thought he did a really good job. You got Chris Manhertz. If he wants to play, hey, let's bring him back, a solid blocker. Greg Van Roten, also want to bring him back. Look, if he's competing as your backup / your starter, I'm feel really good about that. We're going to add competition. However, I think between Evan Neal, Greg Van Roten, and Jake Cabas, maybe you can figure something out there as that other guard starting position there. And then some special teams wise, Jamie Gillen, I want to bring him back 2 years, $4 million as your punter. I think that's a very fair deal. Shouldn't be super expensive either. Casey Kreider, will bring him back as a long snapper. And then on the defense side of the ball, I want to bring back Azeez Ojulari if possible. We need the depth, right? And Azeez definitely he's a great sack artist, and I would love to have him as that number 3 guy. We still need to add some more depth in the draft or free agency, etc. But between Azeez Ojulari, KT, and Brian Burns, I feel pretty good about that. We'll also bring back Patrick Johnson, give me some more depth there, compete for a roster spot. When it comes time. That's not going to be guaranteed money. He'll compete, and we can go from there. I will let go some of these guys here throughout the roster. I want to bring back Ty Summers and Greg Stroman. Just going to be some depth on the teams. Ty Summers, good special teamer. Stroman, good backup there in the slot. You can play on the outside too. Now, we're going to let go of some guys. Like I said, Jason Pinnock, tough decision, but ultimately, I think we can hopefully find a little bit more help in that back end. And let's start now go next to the exclusive restricted free agents. I'm just going to bring these guys back. And I think there's a really good chance that they bring back at least a couple of these dudes. I'm calculating at $4 million. It's probably going to be less because some of these guys are not going to make the roster anyway. I think Toman Fox was the only guy that I feel good that will make the roster. Tommy DeVito will probably make the roster too. Anyway, just want to make sure we bring these guys back for now to compete for a roster position. They have the exclusive rightsivity to it. So here we go. We're at free agency now, and you're saying, oh, Aaron Rodgers, what? But okay, so the rumors, of course, are circulating right now. We'll see what happens. But with the Rams now being off the table, maybe Rodgers says, you know what? I'm just going to stay in New York. I'm going to go kick Woody Johnson's butt by letting me go. And this New York Jets football team, which wouldn't shock me at all. So it'd be hilarious to see in the same stadium. But Aaron Rodgers, 1 year, $10 million. To be real with you, I have no idea what type of money he's going to get on the open market. I really don't know. So I've kind of it's a very generalized number. It could be more, it could be less. So I just put at $10 million, just throwing a number out there. That's really what it is. I have no idea. But Rodgers coming in here makes a lot of sense. He stays right in New York. And for Joe Schoen and Brian Dable, if you're talking about a guy that can come in right now and give you a real chance to get to the playoffs with this team, they have a good football team. They really do. And they're going to be able to upgrade this football team a lot in the draft. And already what they have with some young talent, they have core foundational players. That's what I'll give Joe Schoen. He's gotten some core foundational players. They need a quarterback. Aaron Rodgers has the potential to at least be way better. I think last season for the Jets was his floor. It could get worse, absolutely. But for the most part, I think that was his floor with better coaching. And this gives you the opportunity too, as John Mara, to see, hey, is Brian Dable a head coach? Can he be the head coach for the New York Football Giants? Or are we going to be looking for a new coach? And it doesn't allow them to throw tons and tons of investment between Joe Schoen and Brian Dable where, you're spending tons of draft capital to come up to the number 1 overall pick either. So it's a win-win scenario for everybody where Rodgers comes in, end up the quarterback for this next season, and hopefully, hey, you can get you to the playoffs. And you might be saying, well, if Aaron Rodgers does get to this playoffs for one season and maybe we lose in the first round, then what's the point, right? Then we don't have a draft pick to get a quarterback in next draft. And I get that, but at the same time, you're trying to find out, hey, is Brian Dable a serious head coach? So there's partially that too I want to see. And you could always trade up a little bit if you had to next season. And then you go to the rest of this, though. Josh Palmer coming over from the Chargers, 2 years, $18 million, $9 million average. I think he is a talented wide receiver, has some inconsistencies with his hands, but he's a talented guy that it could be a really good number 2 wide receiver. And that's really what I'm looking at here. A guy that's not going to break the bank, going to come in next to Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson and be a really solid number 2, number 3 wide receiver. And then we got to Fred Johnson. Good, solid swing tackle for the Philadelphia Eagles. Stepped up, played well. And you look at the Trey Hendrickson game as the most glaring one, right? It's one of the top pass rushers. I thought he held his own. So he comes over here, division rival. And if you have injuries, Andrew Thomas or Jermaine Illuminor, Fred Johnson can fill in and give you a little bit better swing tackle ability than Joshua Zudu or Chris Hubbard. And then on the defense side of the ball, Bobby Brown, 1 year, $2 million coming over from the Rams here. So 2 guys out west. And Bobby Brown is a nose tackle and somebody that can help stop the run for this football team. And it's a little bit cheaper than Raheem Nunez, Roches, and maybe can upgrade to a little more upside, I think. Xavier Woods, I mean, he is coming a little bit of a down year, so we'll see how that goes. But hey, he's got some talent there. Xavier Woods, I'm going to bring him in on a 2-year, $10 million deal. There's still plenty in the tank with Xavier Woods. He's been relatively healthy, too, throughout his career. So I like the reliability that he has. And just as a solid number 2 type of safety in the NFL, like you put him in the back end with Tyler Nubin. He's been a reliable force there for Carolina over these past couple of years. Even going back to Dallas, he's been a very, very solid football player and not going to break the bank either. And then you have to project our draft spend because that third overall pick is going to be like $7 million. At least that's what is projected. So that's where the majority of this $10 million in projected cap spend comes from. That does get us right to the thin of the margin, but we're in a good position. So let's talk about the roster one more time, and then we'll get into the actual draft here. I'm sure you're ready. Offensive line-wise is going to be an area I continue to invest in here. I think it's one of their bigger needs other than the quarterback. Quarterback's still a need. We still need to draft a quarterback, in my opinion, at least be competition for that backup position and hopefully for the future behind Aaron Rodgers to develop. But tackle of the future, Jermaine Illuminor going in last year of that contract, / maybe a swing tackle for the future. Like they need to make sure they're investing, get somebody else into that, be that third, fourth tackle in this line, and then for the future, be a starter for that right tackle. Center is actually the bigger area of need for me going into this draft. We didn't get one in free agency, but I'm going to look in the draft. I think we can find somebody on day 3 to give more competition with John Michael Schmitz. And at guard, I feel good. We brought back Greg Van Roten. You got John Runyon. If he wants to start at right guard, whatever. Like, you keep him at left guard, that's fine. But Evan Neal, Joshua Zudu, Greg Van Roten, they're competing. Jake Cabas, they're all competing for that right guard spot. So you have 4 guys that are competing there for that right guard position. Wide receiver-wise, I'm in a pretty good position. You could add somebody else. So I think like a 5th guy is what we'll be looking to do. It's not like an early need, but it is something we can look to add. As I talk about quarterback, we'll definitely look to add. Running back, not super worried about it. Tight end, same thing. Maybe add a blocker, but ultimately we brought Chris Manhertz back, so we should be okay. And then defensively, I would say my biggest priorities are the interior of the defensive line and the cornerback position. I did not add a free agent in the cornerback position, so I think you probably know where we're going in the draft here. Spoiler alert, but hey, no spoilers even needed at this point. Anyway, if you don't add somebody in free agency, it's going to come down to, do you go quarterback in that 3rd overall pick, or do you go with like a Travis Hunter? That's really, in general, that's the 2 areas that they're going to be looking at. So I don't think we're giving too much away there. But interior defense line, definitely going to be a day 2 priority for me. Let's get somebody else in here. Safety-wise will be a late round throw / UDFA pickup. Same thing with the linebacker position. Maybe we try to draft like a coverage guy to develop under Bobby Okereke, just in case. So here we go, G-Man. It is draft time. Let's go. And starting out, Travis Hunter, no quarterback here. We're going to rock with Aaron Rodgers. Travis Hunter's coming into this football team, going to be a stud in this secondary, man. I love what he brings to the table with his zone instincts. I mean, he can play man coverage too. I'm not worried about that. Travis Hunter is a unique athlete, and he's going to be able to play a little wide receiver too for this team. But since we got 3 solid wide receivers, he'll end up coming in and being their 4th wide receiver. You don't have to play him full-time as a wide receiver. He's going to come in here, play cornerback, and you don't have to play him as a full-time corner either. Like, you have a balance now between Cordell Fly, Deonte Banks, Andrew Phillips, and Travis Hunter. You have a good rotation there. And it also gives us a good rotation at the wide receiver position between Neighbors, Hunter, Robinson, and our new acquired Josh Palmer. Like, that's a really solid group. So I just feel like it gives you a really, really nice core at the cornerback position and the wide receiver position. I believe Travis Hunter is the best player in this draft. Just so talented of a guy. I'm not worried about the size profile with him. He's a top tier athlete with top tier instincts at the position. Then we go on, and we're not done on defense. Oh no, we're getting Darius Alexander next to Sexy Dexy. Oh man, I'm ready. I'm revved up. This is going to be like Braden Fisk 2.0 right here. And a guy that just tested so well at the combine. He played well at the Senior Bowl. He is a game wrecker, and he's going to get after the quarterback with Sexy Dexy. It's going to create a lot of one-on-one matchups for somebody out there. So this defensive line, we got some renewed firepower there and much needed depth for sure. Let's go on to our next pick. Ozzie Trapillo from Boston College. And Trapillo's like a guy that's got that tremendous size profile, almost 6'8". Dude's a giant out there. And I mean it, the pun intended, right? But he's a guy that's going to give them that true tackle size. Then I think under Brasilio, let him develop at that right tackle position. He does have left tackle experience as well. So if you needed him to be a swing man, he certainly has that capability to do so. But with his arm length, with his size, and overall ability to, as a pass protector, I think there's a lot of upside and a lot of developmental upside to his game. Already a really solid player. Like, I think right now he could come in and start if he had to. I mean, it wouldn't be perfect. He isn't a perfect athlete either. I mean, he's nimble. He's got quick feet, but there's some stiffness, right? There's some change of direction things. There's going to be some limitations to his game. However, once again, I think he's going to be a really, really nice developmental tackle for this football team and really help them out as some more depth too early on. And then going on to our 4th round pick, we got to take a quarterback or else, right? But no, we're taking one here. Riley Leonard from Notre Dame. I'm so happy he had a good season here, kind of coming off a rough year and dealing with some things too. But the dude is a fighter. There's one guy, you talk about motivation, he certainly has it. So I think this guy's going to come in, if nothing else, going to be a good backup in the NFL. I think he'll be around in the NFL for a very long time. Like, I don't think he's not going to be in the NFL sort of guy. He may not be a starter or anything like that, but he has the talent. Like, he's got the arm talent. I mean, his accuracy took a dip this year. I do think it took a bit of a dip, and especially under pressure. That would be my biggest knock on him. He's just got to get better under pressure, not scrambling out of pockets so often, so quickly, and especially with some of that accuracy under pressure. So ultimately, he has the arm talent, the athleticism. He's always seems to make like a 50-yard run, especially going back to the Duke tape. Like, every single game, he'd have like one run over 40, 50 yards. So he's a solid athlete with great ball carrier vision, the arm talent, the size profile, the work ethic, the drive, all that's there with Riley Leonard. So, hey, taking a chance, right? Taking another chance here with Seth McLaughlin, a guy that I think would have been a lot higher on boards if it not been for the injury, the season-ending injury there for the Buckeyes this season. He is a very strong center player and kind of gives you a little bit of the opposite of what you have right now with John Michael Schmitz. Very strong anchor, holds the point of attack, and certainly going to be a nice pass protector. He's a little limited, okay? I don't think he's going to be the greatest type of on-the-move run blocker, and I think they can get away with that in their scheme here. But he definitely has power to move guys in more of a gap central system. So you get Seth McLaughlin in here to come in. Doesn't have to start right away. You can let him get healthy, but maybe mid-season, more competition with John Michael Schmitz in that center position. So want to add more help there. And then you get Eugene Asante from Auburn, a guy that combine, testing up the wazoo here with a 4.4, and you see it on film. He's a really good athlete. Now, there are some limitations. Not going to be the strongest guy out there and taking on blocks, especially at his size. It's fine. Like, he's a guy with athletic profile that can be an early down blitzer for this football team, or late down blitzer, whatever, and certainly going to give them a coverage developing linebacker behind Bobby Okereke as a former safety as well. So just certainly going to take on a little more development here. Can be a great special teamer as well with that speed. Then we go on to Johnny Walker Jr. from Mizzou, and he's going to Mizzou right into this Giants locker room and be a good depth. And that's really what I'm looking at here. Not a tremendous athlete, but a solid athlete. He's got decent enough length by the looks of it. And I think he's actually got some decent pass rush moves to his game as of right now, too. So he can continue to develop a little more. I just do think he's not, an elite athlete or anything out there on film. He will help them out, though, in terms of depth and give him like a 4th, 5th edge rusher to compete for a roster position. Final pick of the draft, Craig Woodson from California, the Golden Bear. He's going to be a nice little backup safety, special teamer for this team, and just continue to add some more depth to the roster. That's really what we're trying to do. I feel like they're a little thin. Dane Belton's going to be a free agent after this season, so I want to make sure that we have enough depth, enough guys between special teams and for injuries, etc. Woodson, he also tested better than I thought. He had a 4.45, I believe, and also had like a 36-inch vertical and good solid jump numbers, everything like that. He tested pretty well, and he shows. I mean, I've only watched highlights of Craig Woodson, so I have not actually watched game tape and don't have a full evaluation on this guy. But he seems like he's a hard-nosed guy coming downhill. He's got good size as well, and for that athleticism profile, definitely worth a shot here at the end of the draft. He may even go earlier than this after the combine. Anyway, that's going to conclude the draft. Talk about coaching real quick, because this is a huge season for Joe Schoen, Brian Dable, this whole staff, right? Mike Kafka and Shane Bowen on the defense side of the football. So we'll see how things can come together. I still believe in the staff. I really do. I understand some of the decisions Joe Schoen has made. At the same time, I feel like he's got to have a little bit more understanding of the situation. That's been my biggest gripe, is the human element that he takes to this approach into the football is a little bit too analytical for my liking. Sometimes you got to keep players around for culture and for, the impact that they make. It is tough, even though the position, I get the whole positional value thing. So that would be my biggest little knock on Joe Schoen. I do think he's done a decent job of bringing in some talented guys at some premium positions. So I want to knock that. Brian Dable has taken a step back, and the scheme this season was not perfect. And even with the quarterback play being as bad as it was, I still thought there were some moments where I'm questioning the play calls, him and Mike Kafka. So those things are going to have to iron out. Like going from his rookie season as a head coach to now, it's definitely been a big time drop off there. So we'll see how it all works out. Shane Bowen going to be going into year number 2 as a defensive coordinator. And we go on to the roster, and in general, like there's so many ways I talk about this, to draft, to free agency strategy, all those things. This is just my approach, but there are plenty of different options in free agency and in the draft, many different approaches you can go. And the main one is you talk about the quarterback situation. What do they do? I personally like going after Aaron Rodgers, especially in this draft class, getting him in here where the coaching staff is at right now. It gives you guys a chance to win right now, see what you have. And that way you're not throwing tons of draft capital potentially and trading up to the number 1 overall pick to the Tennessee Titans to go get Cam Ward. Or if you want to go get Shedeur Sanders at number 3, whatever happens, right? I just think it is smart to do this. You get Aaron Rodgers, you give yourself that time, and then maybe next season, if it doesn't work out, you get a new coaching staff in there because they're going to be on the hot seat anyway. And then you figure you draft a quarterback then. And then in terms of offensive line, you got to continue to invest in this offensive line. Yes, they made strides, especially when they were healthy early in the season. When Thomas went down, things went downhill, of course. But you got to continue to invest in that. You got to get depth no matter what here. You got to bring in a guy like Fred Johnson to be a swing tackle. You got to draft somebody to develop behind Jermaine Illuminor, who's going to last year of his contract. We did that with Ozzie Trapillo. We got to add competition at the center position. Like, they got to upgrade there. But my hope is between Neal, between Kabas, Ezeudu, and we brought back Greg Van Roten, like, you should find a starting guard next to John Runyon. Like, I feel good about that. And just running the table back with Greg Van Roten and John Runyon is not the worst idea. It can definitely be upgraded, and no matter what, but I decided to use the picks at the tackle and the center position. Tight end wise, I talked about earlier, you could possibly draft a developmental backup blocking tight end, but right now, not super worried about that. We got Travis Hunter, Josh Palmer in free agency. That's going to be a really nice tandem of wide receiving core, right? Hunter can play in money downs in certain situations to give relief or depth and things like that. And then on the defense side of the football, my big priorities here were improving the secondary and improving the defensive interior. Gotta do it. And with Darius Alexander coming in here next to Sexy Dexy, you got and Bobby Brown is like a run defender here. We did have to move on Raheem Nunez Roches, but you still have Elijah Chapman. Maybe DJ Davidson competes here with Elijah Garcia and some of these other guys for some more depth in those roles. Still could use some more depth, right? If you have injuries, it's going to be a bit of a problem, but major improvements here with Darius Alexander and Dexter Lawrence. There's going to be some studs on that defensive line. I'm telling you, that could be a Rams effect 2.0. And then cornerback-wise, I do think free agency is a big area that this team could go after it. Ultimately, that depends on what they do with the quarterback position, right? If they want to draft a quarterback position with their first-round selection, then this is obviously not going to happen. But for me personally, this is what I like doing. You get Travis Hunter in here to be their number 1 cornerback, Deonte Banks and Cordell Flott competing/rotating, and Hunter can work on offense too, so you want to make sure you're keeping those snaps monitored. You got Trey Hawkins too as a 5th cornerback with Greg Strawman too, but True Phillips going to step right in there and be your starting slot. So this secondary looks really, really promising. Linebacker-wise, we had Eugene Usante. It's going to be mainly a special. Same thing with Craig Woodson. These guys are going to be special teamers early on, can compete for roster positions and down the line, developing players. Eugene Asante, more of a coverage player / hybrid blitzer. Woodson, going to be a nice little backup special teamer, dime backer for them. And then Xavier Woods going to come in right away as a starter with Tyler Nubin. Those are your 2 starters. Dane Belton will be your 3rd safety for the next season. We got Johnny Walker too with some depth off the edge. So that is going to do it here for the G-Men and their postseason mock draft. I will be doing another one after free agency, so we'll get more clarity then, especially on the quarterback situation, on what they want to do, weighing all those things. But I hope you guys have a really good day. Let me know what you think. Agree or disagree? What would you do differently? Do you think quarterback should be gone at that number 3 pick or trade up? Or do you think you should go with a Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter or even a Mason Graham? Like, those are all on the table for this Giants football team. So hopefully we can bring back that once a Giant, always a Giants phrase. And I will be talking to you later. I hope you guys have a really good day.